I only wanted the job, but the moment my billionaire boss said my name, I realized he wanted something far more dangerous, my heart. That thought haunted me from the very first day I walked into Knight Industries, echoing in my head like an unwelcome truth I wasn't ready to face. I remember gripping my cheap handbag so tightly that my knuckles turned white, praying no one could see how much my hands were shaking. The lobby itself was intimidating enough to make anyone feel small. Cold marble floors. High glass walls reflecting the city skyline. A silence so polished it almost felt like you needed permission to breathe inside it. People moved around me with the confidence of those who belonged, women in sleek heels tapping across the stone floor, men in tailored suits with eyes fixed on their phones as if holding the world in their palms. Meanwhile, there was me. Maya. A girl whose entire life fit inside a handbag from a discount store. A girl who grew up rationing electricity, now standing inside a building that probably spent more on weekly cleaning than my family did on food in a month. My mother's voice echoed in my head. Keep your shoulders back. Don't sell yourself short. I tried. But every step felt like I was dragging the weight of my entire life behind me. I didn't come there to impress anyone. I didn't come there to change fate. All I wanted was a stable income, something steady, predictable. A job to help my mom's medical bills, to keep the roof from falling in, to finally feel like I wasn't constantly trying to survive. Just a job. Nothing more. But destiny never warns you when it's about to rearrange everything. Because then, I met him. Steve Knight. I heard his name long before I saw his face. Everyone in the elevator whispered about him, almost afraid to speak too loudly, as if he might materialize out of thin air. I remember standing in the back corner, trying to calm my heartbeat, pretending I didn't hear the two women behind me murmuring about him. He's ruthless but brilliant, one whispered. And impossibly good-looking, the other added with a smirk. It's the eyes, the first replied. Those eyes don't miss anything. I tried not to listen. Tried not to let curiosity pull at my mind. CEOs and skyscrapers didn't matter to girls like me. I was there for the job. A desk. A paycheck. Stability. Not some mysterious billionaire. But their whispers clung to me like smoke, drifting around my thoughts even after I stepped out of the elevator. And when I walked down that hallway, its walls covered in abstract art I couldn't begin to understand, I repeated to myself. You're here to work. You're not here to be intimidated. But intimidation came anyway. Because when I finally walked into the executive floor, when I finally looked up and saw him for the first time, every assumption I had shattered instantly. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't what the whispers prepared me for. He was more. Steve Knight stood with a posture so controlled it bordered on elegance. Not stiff, not arrogant, just a man completely at home in power. His suit fit him effortlessly, dark fabric hugging broad shoulders, crisp shirt stark against his complexion. His jawline carried the kind of sharpness sculptors would envy, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were the exact shade between steel and midnight. Calm. Observant. Unreadable. The kind of eyes that didn't just look at you, they looked through you. Into you. And yet somehow, he didn't seem cold. That was the part that threw me. Because the whispers painted him like a storm. But standing there, he felt more like the quiet before one. A stillness that demanded attention. I remember freezing in the doorway like an idiot, every muscle locking, my throat going dry, my mind blank except for one repeating sentence. Please don't let him see how nervous you are. Please, please. But of course he saw. Because of course that was the exact moment I lost my grip on the folder in my hands. Papers slipped out, scattering onto the sleek floor in an embarrassing arc. It sounded louder than it should have, louder than my own heartbeat even. I dropped to my knees instantly, whispering to myself, no, 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 not on the first day. And then something happened that I didn't expect. He knelt too. Right beside me. No hesitation. No annoyance. Just an immediate, effortless movement as if helping me wasn't beneath him, even though everyone said he was the kind of man who rarely lifted a finger unless it was necessary. His hand brushed mine as we both reached for the same sheet of paper. Just a second. Just the lightest touch. But it sent a quick, disorienting ripple through me, like my body registered something my mind didn't understand yet. I swallowed hard. He looked up. And our eyes met. Everything slowed. Everything went silent. His gaze wasn't cold, it was clear. Careful. Focused in a way that made my breath catch, not because he was intimidating, but because it felt like he was trying to read the chapters of my life just from the way my fingers trembled. His voice broke the moment gently. "Relax, Maya," he murmured, soft, calm, too steady for the chaos spiraling inside me. "You're doing fine." My name on his lips felt strangely intimate. Too personal for someone I had just met. Too warm for a man with his reputation. My cheeks burned instantly. I looked down, pretending to focus on the papers even though all I could think was, why does he say my name like that? Why does he look at me like he already knows me? Why does my heartbeat sound like it's trying to escape my chest? He gathered the last paper, stood slowly, and offered it to me. His fingers brushed mine again, light, unintentional, but enough to send another ripple through me. I hated that he noticed. Because the small corner of his mouth lifted, barely, but just enough to show he knew exactly how flustered I was. Not in a mocking way. Not in a superior way. Just aware. And that awareness scared me more than anything else in that building. After handing me the folder, he stepped back, giving me space, but his eyes lingered for a second longer than they needed to. Just a second. But long enough for something in my chest to shift. Long enough for my mind to whisper a quiet warning. You're not ready for whatever he is. I didn't want a warning. I wanted the job. A simple life. Predictable days. Quiet nights. A paycheck every other Friday. That was all. But something in the way he looked at me said the universe had a different plan. A plan I wasn't prepared for. A plan I didn't ask for. A plan I didn't want. At least not then. Because deep down, in the smallest part of my mind, a thought lingered like a forbidden whisper. If a man like Steve Knight ever wanted something from me, would I even know how to say no? I shook the thought away instantly. This was work. A job. Professional. Strict. Simple. And yet, as I followed the HR assistant out of his office a moment later, the echo of his voice replayed in my mind, soft, controlled, unsettlingly warm. You're doing fine. Why did I care so much about those words? Why did they feel like they mattered? Why did I feel, deep in my chest, that my life had just shifted, even though nothing had actually happened yet? The truth is, I think some part of me sensed it immediately. That this man, this quiet, sharp, unreadable billionaire, wasn't going to stay in the background of my story. That he wasn't just a boss. Or a CEO. Or a name whispered in elevators. That something unknown, something dangerous, something deeply emotional, had started in that moment. Something I didn't want. Something I wasn't looking for. Something that made my breath feel too heavy and my heart feel too loud. Something that terrified me in a way I couldn't explain. Because even then, before the stolen glances, before the rumors, before the nights I couldn't sleep because of him, I felt the shift. The quiet, unsettling realization that this wasn't just a job. This was the beginning of something else. Something I wasn't ready for. Something he wasn't supposed to give. Something I had no intention of wanting. But fate doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. And Steve Knight. He was the kind of man who didn't walk into your life quietly. He was the kind of man you felt before you understood. The kind of man you noticed before you fully saw him. The kind of man who made you forget you ever said you only wanted the job. I didn't come there for romance. I kept repeating that to myself like a prayer meant to keep my heart steady. I wasn't searching for butterflies or stolen glances or anything dangerous disguised as desire. I came for stability. A job. A chance to breathe without calculating how much I had left in my bank account. Romance had no space in the version of my life I was trying to rebuild. I didn't come there for him. But the universe never warns you before it rearranges every emotion you thought you had under control. Because the truth was, before I even knew his name, before I even understood the weight he carried in that building, there was something in the air that shifted whenever he walked into a room. A soft hush. A subtle pause. A tension that you felt before you even looked up. And the way he looked at me. It felt like he already knew something about me I hadn't figured out yet. Not in a threatening way. Not in a possessive way. Just aware. As if my presence disturbed a balance he had grown too accustomed to maintaining. I felt at the moment I stepped into his office, a room too big, too polished, too quiet to belong to a normal human being. A wall of glass displayed the entire city like a moving painting of opportunity and danger. Behind his dark wooden desk stood Steve Knight, the kind of man whose presence filled a space even when he barely moved. My breath caught. Not because he was breathtaking, though he was, but because I felt exposed. Like every insecurity I tried to bury before walking through the front door suddenly sat right on my shoulders, glaring under the fluorescent lights. And then I tripped. Not a graceful stumble. Not a cute wobble. No, my heel caught on the edge of the carpet like it had been waiting specifically for me. I pitched forward, the folder in my hands flying open, sending documents scattering across the marble floor in the most humiliating arc possible. The sound echoed. Sharp. Unforgiving. A spotlight of embarrassment burned through my entire body. I wanted to vanish. Or melt into the floor. Or evaporate. Anything that would erase the moment I made an absolute fool of myself in front of the most composed man I had ever seen. I scrambled down to gather the papers, whispering, "No, no, no," under my breath, half praying, half panicking. My fingers shook, my heart thudded violently, and all I could think was, "Great. Now he knows I'm a walking disaster. Maybe I should just quit before I even start." But instead of the cold silence I braced for, instead of sharp annoyance or some clipped order for security to escort me out, something else happened. Something I did not expect. He knelt down beside me. Steve Knight. The billionaire CEO. The man who could make or break careers with a single sentence. Kneeling on the floor to help me, a girl with trembling hands and a discount handbag, pick up scattered papers. It didn't make sense. No man with his reputation should have moved the way he did, calm, deliberate, utterly unfazed by the chaos I caused. His presence was steady enough to silence the storm building inside my chest. He reached for a paper at the same moment I did, and the back of his hand brushed against mine. Warm. Grounded. Too gentle for the world he lived in. That moment, less than a second, barely even a touch, sent a ripple across my senses that felt entirely out of place. Like my body recognized something I hadn't named yet. I inhaled sharply. I hoped he didn't notice. But he did. Of course he did. He looked up, eyes steady, unreadable. That close up, they were even more intense, gray with hints of blue, sharp at the edges, softened at the center. Eyes that held stillness and storms at the same time. Eyes that made my thoughts scatter just as easily as the papers had. "Relax, Maya," he murmured. His voice was low enough to vibrate somewhere deep inside me, warm enough to feel like a blanket I didn't ask for but suddenly needed. "You're doing fine." My heart shouldn't have reacted the way it did. It shouldn't have stuttered. Shouldn't have twisted. Shouldn't have pressed so hard against my ribs that I couldn't breathe properly for a moment. I hated that he noticed. Because the corner of his mouth lifted, tiny, almost invisible, but unmistakably aware. Not mocking. Not amused. More like he was trying not to show something he didn't want me to read. I gathered the papers quickly, trying to regain whatever dignity I had left. He handed me the last page, his fingers brushing mine again, this time slower, almost intentional, though I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. I stood up first, desperate to put distance between us. My palms were sweating. My pulse was loud. I had come there to be professional, to be strong, to be the version of myself that didn't crack under pressure. But standing in front of him, with his gaze lingering on me like he was studying the way I breathed, I felt anything but strong. The situation was supposed to be simple. Straightforward. Predictable. I was the new assistant. He was the billionaire CEO. Two parallel lines that should never cross. Our worlds weren't meant to intertwine. Not logically. Not emotionally. Not in any universe where my bank account determined the price of my choices. But the spark came quickly, faster than I could avoid. Faster than I could pretend not to notice. Because something shifted in that tiny moment. Something subtle. Something dangerous. Something that felt like a rope quietly looping around the both of us, pulling just enough to make breathing feel different. When I stepped back, trying to put space between us, he stepped forward, not in a predatory way, but in a way that made it impossible not to feel his presence. Like gravity had its own rules around him. An unexpected shiver crawled up my spine. And that's when it hit me, hard and unwelcome. Why does the room feel different now? Why does he look at me like that? Why do I feel like I've accidentally opened a door I wasn't meant to see behind? I tried to focus on the papers. On the job. On the checklist HR gave me. On anything that wasn't him. But my heartbeat was too loud. My thoughts were too scattered. My breath was too shallow. And the worst part? He noticed. Again. His eyes dipped to my trembling hands for just a second. His brow tightened. Not judgment. Not annoyance. Something softer. Something like concern he wasn't sure he was allowed to show. That small shift in his expression was the rehook I didn't want, the silent pull I couldn't ignore. Because men like him weren't supposed to care about nerves or shaky hands or first day fear. They weren't supposed to kneel on the floor. They weren't supposed to say your name gently. They weren't supposed to watch you long after the moment had passed. But he did. And even though I tried to convince myself the moment meant nothing, something in the way he stood there, quiet, grounded, too aware, told me it wasn't nothing for him either. My heartbeat kept whispering a truth I didn't want to face. This job wasn't going to be simple. He wasn't going to be simple. Nothing about this situation was going to stay the way I thought it would. Because men like Steve Knight weren't background characters. They weren't meant to stay behind desks or inside brief first impressions. Men like him disrupted things. Shifted things. Started things they shouldn't. And somewhere deep in my chest, an emotion I wasn't ready to name stirred, soft, uncertain, trembling at the edges. I tried to bury it. I tried to swallow it. I tried to walk away from it. But the spark, whatever it was, had already started. Quiet but undeniable. Small but persistent. A spark that wasn't supposed to exist at all. Not between us. Not here. Not now. And definitely not this fast. It happened late one evening, one of those nights when the office felt like another world entirely. The kind of world where the glass walls reflected back pieces of me I wasn't ready to face. Everyone had gone home long ago, leaving nothing but the sound of the air system humming and the soft glow of the city stretching endlessly below. I sat alone at my desk, rubbing my temples, drowning in documents that suddenly felt heavier than they should have. I whispered to myself under my breath, barely moving my lips, "Why am I like this? Why do I care what he thinks?" Like the universe heard me, like the room itself betrayed me, I felt someone behind me, before I even saw him. Steve. His presence always arrived quiet but charged, like the air thickened just by him walking into it. "You should head home," he said softly. I turned too fast, my chair spinning slightly, my pulse jumping right into my throat. And he stepped forward instinctively, as if catching me was automatic for him, like he'd been doing it for years even though this was only my 3rd month at Night Industries. He was suddenly too close. Too close in a way that made my lungs forget what they were supposed to do. I could smell his cologne, clean, cedar-like, warm in a way that made my chest tighten. I hated that something as simple as the scent of him had that kind of effect on me. "I'm almost done," I whispered, trying to sound composed, failing miserably. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would have noticed, but I saw it. A softening. A moment of hesitation. A crack in the stone-like discipline he wore like armor. "You don't have to prove yourself to me," he said. But that was exactly the problem. I was trying to prove myself, to him, to the company, to the version of me that desperately needed to succeed. And maybe, in a corner of my heart I didn't want to acknowledge yet, I was also trying to prove my worth in his eyes, even though I had no business wanting that kind of attention from a man like Steve. I forced a small laugh that didn't feel like mine. "I'm not proving anything. I'm just finishing what I started." He didn't move. Didn't step back. His gaze lingered a second too long, almost as if he was trying to read the truth straight from my face. And for a split second, just one, I wondered if he saw the mess my emotions were becoming. The questions. The hopes I wasn't supposed to be having. Then the moment broke when his phone buzzed. He stepped away, clearing his throat lightly as he checked the screen, that unreadable mask sliding back over his features. And that should have been the end of it. Should have. But the real complication didn't arrive until the next morning. Her. Vivian. The woman who walked into Night Industries like she owned not just the company but the entire floor, the hallways, the walls, the air we breathed. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble, announcing her presence long before I ever saw her. People glanced up from their desks with this strange mixture of awe and discomfort. The kind of reaction you give someone powerful enough to ruin you with a sentence, someone beautiful enough to make you feel small without even trying. She had this elegance that didn't need effort. A perfectly tailored white suit, diamond earrings sharp enough to reflect the coldness in her eyes, and hair styled so flawlessly it made me self-conscious about my simple bun. And when she smiled, it wasn't friendly. It was polished, weaponized. I learned her identity quickly, not through gossip, but through the way the entire atmosphere changed when she entered Steve's office. She didn't even knock. She just walked in, waving off the secretary like she didn't exist. And when she passed by me, she barely gave me a glance, as if I were an insignificant detail in her path. But the look she gave Steve? That one I felt from across the room. She was his ex-fiancée. Which explained too much and not nearly enough. Later, during the meeting where half the board was present, I stood beside Steve, passing him documents, taking notes, doing everything I could to blend into a corner while still doing my job. I didn't want attention, not in that room, not with her there. But the universe isn't fond of listening to what I want. Vivian's eyes found me the moment she stepped inside. Not curiosity. Not confusion. Recognition. The kind that felt dangerous. She took her seat across from Steve, crossing her legs with a sharp, deliberate grace. She flicked her gaze at me, head tilted slightly, and smiled the way someone smiles at a puzzle piece that doesn't belong. "A new assistant?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Steve, you usually prefer more refined choices." The words hit harder than they should have. My cheeks burned instantly. The room felt colder, like someone had cracked a window in the dead of winter. Every pair of eyes in that boardroom seemed to shift, not blatantly, but enough for me to feel exposed, judged, measured, and found lacking. My throat tightened. I kept staring at my clipboard, trying to pretend her comment didn't slice right through me. Steve's jaw flexed. A small movement. Too small for most people to notice. But I did. He didn't look at me, he didn't look at her. Instead, he focused on the papers in front of him like they were the only safe thing in the room. "She's the best person for the job," he said calmly. But there was something in his tone beneath the calmness. Something sharper. Defending me with a subtle fury I didn't expect. Vivian leaned back, crossing her arms, a slow smirk curving her red-painted lips. "Is that the only reason?" The implication hung in the air like smoke, settling over the room, twisting into the cracks of everyone's thoughts. And maybe I imagined it, or maybe I didn't, but I thought I saw a flicker of satisfaction in her expression, as if she'd thrown a grenade and was waiting to see how badly it detonated. My fingers tightened around my pen until they ached. My heart beat too loudly in my chest. I didn't dare look at Steve. I didn't dare move. Vivian's gaze stayed on me, sharp enough to cut. Like she was sizing me up. Like she already decided I was a threat. Like she thought she knew what I felt even though I didn't fully understand it myself. The room shifted in that moment, not physically, not visibly, but I felt something change. Something in the way Vivian studied me, like she could peel back my insecurities with a single look. Something in the tension that rolled off Steve so subtly only someone who watched him too closely would notice. And maybe I was watching him too closely. But how could I not, when the air between all three of us pulsed with something that shouldn't have existed? The meeting continued. Voices droned on. Charts were discussed. Deals were analyzed. But the only thing I could feel was the weight of Vivian's eyes, the unspoken taunts behind her smile, the invisible line she'd drawn on the boardroom floor, as if daring me to cross it. Every time Steve spoke, she watched him with something complicated behind her expression. Something territorial. Something unfinished. Every time I handed him a document, I felt her stare like claws on my skin. Each moment was another reminder that whatever this was, this strange, uninvited tension between Steve and me, someone else had noticed it. Someone who could turn it into a weapon. And the worst part? I wasn't sure anymore if I was imagining everything, or if I'd already stepped into something I wasn't prepared for. From then on, everything intensified, slowly at first, then all at once, like something that had been waiting under the surface finally decided to breach. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way movies make these things seem. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was subtle, dangerous, quiet. The kind of shift only two people trapped inside the same growing tension could feel. It started with stolen glances in hallways. Small, fleeting things that lasted a fraction of a second too long. I would be walking past the conference room, carrying a stack of reports, fully convinced I was invisible to everyone, until I felt eyes on me. And every time I looked up, Steve was there. Sometimes leaning against a doorframe, sometimes seated at the head of a table, sometimes standing behind employees who were speaking to him. His gaze always found me, like his mind registered my presence before he consciously allowed it. He always looked away quickly. Always. But the damage was already done. Then came the moments when our hands brushed while passing files. Innocent accidents. Harmless, if anyone else were watching. But every time our fingers touched, something jolted through me, something sharp, quiet, and terrifyingly alive. And the way he'd inhale softly, barely audible, made it worse. Made it clear he felt something too. Something neither of us had any business feeling. I tried to ignore it. I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. I tried to work, to stay focused, to bury myself in tasks. But I couldn't control the tightness that wound itself into my chest whenever another woman laughed too loudly around him. Or touched his arm. or smiled with that overly sweet energy women use when they're interested in a man who can change their lives with a single sentence. I hated how it made me feel. Jealousy had never been an emotion I entertained. It wasn't something I wanted. But with Steve, it crept in even when I fought it. Even when I reminded myself that he was my boss, a billionaire CEO, someone far above my world. Someone whose attention would never realistically be mine. And yet, there was that heat in his eyes. That quiet intensity that scared me because it mirrored something inside me I wasn't ready to admit. Something too big, too real, too risky. He tried to maintain distance. I saw the effort. He kept his voice steady around me, kept his expression professional, kept his comments brief. But there were slips, small, unguarded moments when something in him broke through and made the air between us hum. I could feel him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. During meetings. During late nights. Even during casual interactions, like when he handed me a coffee or when I walked past his office door and caught him glancing in my direction before pretending he hadn't. The air itself shifted when he entered a room. I used to think that was an exaggeration people used when describing powerful men, but with him, it was real. It felt like the space recognized him before any of us did, adjusting, preparing, bracing. And I felt him trying. Felt him resisting. Felt him losing that resistance one impossible heartbeat at a time. But the night everything truly changed, everything deepened, everything crossed into something neither of us could turn away from, that night came on a stormy evening. The kind of storm that rattles windows and makes the building feel alive. Most people had already gone home. Only a skeleton crew remained, scattered across departments, finishing last-minute tasks before escaping into the rain-soaked darkness outside. I stayed behind because Steve had asked for the newly updated proposals first thing in the morning, and I didn't want to disappoint him. Or maybe, deep down, I didn't want to leave the building knowing he was still inside it. Maybe staying felt safer than going home to the silence waiting for me. The thunder rolled low and heavy, vibrating through the glass. I kept glancing up from my computer, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling spreading across my skin. Storms never bothered me, but power outages did. Darkness did. Darkness reminded me of the night my father walked out. No warning. No explanation. Just footsteps in the dark hallway, the living room light flickering once before going out completely. I still didn't know if the bulb died on its own or if he flipped the switch before leaving. But the memory clung to me like a shadow, and every time lights flickered, my body remembered panic before my mind even realized what was happening. And that night, the office lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then everything went black. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Just pure, gripping fear, a cold hand wrapping around my throat, squeezing. My chest tightened immediately, the darkness closing in on me, swallowing every bit of noise and certainty. My breathing became shaky. My hands trembled. The computer screen had gone dark. The hallway outside was pitch black. I stood there frozen, unable to move, heart pounding painfully against my ribs. Not again, I whispered to myself. Please, not again. I wasn't even crying, but my body reacted like I was small tremors, shallow breaths, that drowning sensation in my chest. And then... footsteps. Fast. Firm. Unmistakably his. Hey, Steve's voice came from the darkness, closer than I expected. Maya? I didn't know how he got to me so quickly. Didn't know if he'd been nearby or if he'd come straight from his office the moment he noticed the lights flicker. But he reached me. Somehow, he always reached me. I turned toward the sound, unable to form words. He stepped closer, and even though I couldn't see his face clearly, I felt his presence wrap around me like something protective. Something grounding. Look at me, he whispered gently. You're safe. I'm here. Those words hit me harder than I was ready for. I didn't mean to grab his jacket. My fingers just found fabric, warm, solid, because I needed something to hold on to before I fell apart. It wasn't thought. It wasn't intention. It was instinct, raw and terrified. And he didn't mean to wrap his arms around me. But the moment my hands clutched his jacket, something shifted in him. Something deep. Something quiet. His arms went around me before either of us could think, pulling me against his chest in a way that felt inevitable. His warmth swallowed the cold panic strangling me. His heartbeat was steady, grounding, a slow rhythm that pulled mine back from the edge. The storm outside rumbled again, but for the first time that night, I didn't flinch. He held me. And I let him. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. The office. The storm. The darkness. Everything fell away, leaving only the quiet, forbidden warmth of him wrapped around me. His breath brushed the top of my head. My fingers clenched his jacket like I needed him to stay, just for another second. Just until my heart stopped racing. Just until my mind returned to me. He didn't pull away. He didn't speak. He just held me, and somehow that silence felt louder than anything he could have said. And that was when everything collapsed. Not in the tragic sense. Not in the dramatic sense. But in the sense that whatever fragile boundary we'd been pretending still existed between us, broke. There was no unfeeling his arms around me. No unhearing the way he whispered "You're safe." No unknowing the warmth that had settled into me because of him. And I felt it, deep, dangerous, inevitable. He did too. Because when the emergency lights flickered on a few seconds later and he finally stepped back, the look in his eyes wasn't one of apology. It was something else. Something he'd been trying to bury. Something I had been afraid to name. Something impossible to unsee. Vivian didn't wait long to strike. She never did. People like her didn't need time, they needed opportunity. And the moment the storm knocked the lights out, the moment Steve's arms wrapped around me, the moment the emergency lights glowed just enough to outline the shape of us, close, warm, too close, she found her weapon. And she used it. The next morning, my phone vibrated non-stop. Notifications blew up my screen like a series of tiny detonations. At first, I thought it was a group chat. Then I thought something major happened at work. But when I opened the first message, my stomach dropped so violently I had to grip the edge of my bed to steady myself. Because there it was. Vivian's post. A photo, grainy, dark, taken from the opposite end of the hallway during the blackout. But the angle, oh God, the angle. It made everything look intimate. Not comforting. Not protective. Not innocent. It looked like he was holding me because we couldn't stay away from each other. Like we were lovers caught in a stolen embrace. The caption was simple. Interesting night at the office. Some people can't keep things professional. There was no mention of names. No mention of titles. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who Steve was. Everyone recognized my silhouette. And within minutes, it spread. Colleagues reposted it. Employees whispered in comment sections. Strangers speculated. People added filters and circled our figures like detectives solving a case that had nothing to do with truth. The damage was immediate. When I walked into Night Industries that morning, the world shifted. Heads turned in slow waves. The sound of whispers followed me like my own shadow. People didn't bother pretending they weren't talking about me. Some openly stared. Others lowered their voices, but not enough. I heard everything. Is she seriously acting like she didn't want the attention? So that's why she got hired so fast. I knew something was off. Poor Steve, dragged into another scandal. Poor Steve. Dragged into something. Because of me. The words hit like knives. I kept walking. Held my bag tighter. Tried not to trip. Tried not to let the hot pressure behind my eyes spill over. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that kept me upright. People weren't even subtle. They parted around me like I was something toxic, something contagious. And the worst part? I could feel Steve's office watching me. Not him, his space, his presence, the echo of him. Like he already knew. Like he was waiting. Like something irreversible had already started. HR emailed me before I even reached my desk. Mandatory meeting, immediate. The subject line alone made my stomach twist. Before I could take a breath, my manager walked over with forced sympathy in her eyes. Maya. HR wants you now. Everyone around her pretended to be focused on their computers, but their ears perked so sharply it was painful. I walked down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. Inside the HR room sat 3 people, 2 I recognized, 1 I didn't. Their faces were stiff. Their posture too straight. The air too cold. And on the wall, Vivian's photo. Blown up on a giant screen. My heart collapsed. We received a formal complaint, one of them said. There are concerns about inappropriate conduct, another added. This could damage the company if not handled properly. My voice barely worked. It's not what it looks like. The lights went out and we're aware the building experienced a power failure, the woman in the middle interrupted. However, the optics of the situation are concerning. Concerning. That word felt like an accusation dressed in business clothing. And then they said the words I feared but hadn't prepared for. The board has requested an emergency meeting with Mr. Knight. An ultimatum has been presented. My breath stopped. Just stopped. What ultimatum? I whispered. The woman folded her hands. Either he terminates you immediately, or he steps down as CEO. The room spun. My pulse hammered. My hands went cold. I didn't know which fear was stronger, the fear of losing my job, or the fear that Steve would lose everything because of me. I walked out of HR in a haze, barely aware of the flashing lights overhead, the hum of printers, the distant chatter. The moment I returned to the main floor, everyone stared harder. They already knew. News traveled faster than mercy. I reached my desk, pretending to organize files so my shaking hands wouldn't be noticeable. But the whispers grew louder. A few people exchanged glances full of pity. Others looked triumphant, like they'd predicted this all along. And then I felt it. The elevator opening behind me. The hush that fell across the floor. The shift in the air that always came with him. Steve. He walked toward me, every step heavy with the kind of tension that warned something life-altering was about to happen. His expression was unreadable. Controlled. Too controlled. When he stopped in front of me, my throat closed. Maya, he said softly. Just my name. But it felt like a blade wrapped in velvet. Come with me. He didn't lead me to his office. He didn't take me to HR. He walked toward a private conference room, one we rarely used, quiet, tucked away, far from the eyes of the gossip-hungry world outside the glass walls. The moment the door closed, he exhaled shakily, like he'd been holding his breath since sunrise. I'm so sorry, I whispered before he even spoke. His eyes snapped to mine. Don't apologize. But the guilt in his expression, it gutted me. He ran a hand through his hair, something he only did when he was deeply conflicted. Perfectly polished Steve never broke composure. But this was the man beneath the exterior, the one nobody else got to see. They gave me no choice, he muttered. It was deliberate. Calculated. Vivian, I breathed. He nodded once. Slow. Bitter. She wants control of the company, he whispered. And using you, using us, was the fastest way. The word us made my heart twist painfully. He stepped closer, like he couldn't help it. Like he needed proximity even when he shouldn't. His voice lowered, heavy with something that made my chest burn. Maya. I can survive a scandal. I've done it before. I can fight the board. I can fight Vivian. But you. His voice cracked. And that sound, the break, made my breath catch in my throat. You can't lose your stability because of me, he murmured. You can't lose your reputation, your career, your chance at a future. I won't let them destroy you. Steve. I mean it, he whispered, gaze locked onto mine like he was memorizing me. I can take the fall. You can't. The panic rising inside me felt suffocating. I don't care what people are saying, I whispered. I don't care about rumors or posts or any of this. I do, he said, barely above a whisper. The pain in his eyes was real. Raw. Unfiltered in a way he never allowed himself to be. I do care, Maya, he whispered. Because you deserve better than being dragged through a scandal you didn't create. You deserve better than losing your future because of my mistakes, or my feelings. The last two words broke something inside me. My lips parted. My heart thrashed painfully. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted to believe that everything I'd felt wasn't just in my head. But his next words destroyed me. You're dismissed. Soft. Final. Like a goodbye he never wanted to give. Like a goodbye that didn't just cost him a decision. It cost him me. I stood there frozen, breath trembling, heart cracking in a way that felt too real, too sharp, too sudden. His eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something even worse. Regret. The kind that stays. The kind that haunts. The kind that says he wasn't choosing what he wanted, he was choosing what he believed would save me. But it didn't feel like salvation. It felt like collapse. And everyone outside that door, everyone waiting for a disaster, got exactly what they wanted. While all I could do was stand there and try not to fall apart. I walked out of Night Industries feeling like my heart had been scraped raw, like someone had reached inside my chest with cold fingers and taken something I didn't even know I needed to survive. The revolving door spun behind me with a quiet hiss, and somehow that sound alone felt like an ending, too final, too sharp, too cruel. My ID badge was still in my hand, and it almost hurt to stare at it. That little piece of plastic had been proof that I belonged somewhere, at least for a while. Now it felt like a relic of a life I was being pushed out of. My throat tightened, and before I even reached the bus stop, the tears spilled over. I wasn't the graceful crying type. No, mine came in shaking breaths and sudden bursts that hit me like broken waves, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. The bus arrived, the doors opened, and I climbed in with my head down, hoping no one would pay attention. But of course they did. People always notice the girl falling apart. I pressed my forehead against the dusty window and cried quietly into my sleeve, trying to make no sound but failing miserably. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, eyes swollen, lips trembling, soul missing. And beneath my shaky breathing, all I could hear were the questions slamming through my mind, cruel and relentless. Why did it have to be him? Why did it have to feel like this? Why did everything start the moment everything should have stopped? And the worst one, the one that cut deepest, the one I wasn't ready to face. What if I never see him again? That thought alone made my stomach twist painfully. The idea of never seeing Steve again was something I couldn't process. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But life doesn't care about what's supposed to be. It only gives you what it gives you, and you're left to choke on it. The bus rolled through the city, lights blurring into streaks as if the world itself was in motion, but I was frozen in place. Every memory of him replayed, the hallway glances, the way his jaw tightened when he avoided looking at me, the warmth of his voice that night in the blackout, saying I was safe with him. I gripped the strap of my bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. By the time I reached home, my face was stiff with dried tears and exhaustion. I crawled into bed without turning on the light, clutching a pillow to my chest like it could stop the ache. But it didn't. Nothing did. The days after that were slow in a way that made everything feel heavier. I woke up every morning expecting to feel better, but grief has its own timeline, and mine seemed endless. I filled out job applications mechanically, made myself tea I barely drank, stared at the ceiling for too long. My apartment didn't feel like a home anymore, it felt like a waiting room for a life I wasn't allowed to have. Eventually, I found a small job at a little cafe down the street. It smelled like cinnamon, warm pastries, and hope I wasn't sure I deserved. The work was simple. Comforting. No boardrooms, no corporate politics, no Vivian lurking with fake smiles and sharp intentions. And no Steve. I told myself this was for the best. I told myself that I needed this distance, this quiet, this chance to breathe without feeling like my lungs were betraying me. I told myself he had been a mistake, a bruise, a lesson. But the truth was louder. I missed him. All of him. More than I ever expected, more than I ever wanted to admit. When I took orders, I sometimes caught myself glancing toward the door, hoping he might walk in by accident. When I wiped a table, I found myself remembering how he had stood behind me in the hallway, close enough that I could feel his breath. When I counted tips at night, I wondered if he was still in his office thinking about me the same way I thought about him. Days turned to weeks, and though life moved on around me, something inside me stayed paused, stuck on the moment he said, "You're dismissed." His voice had cracked when he said it. The kind of crack that doesn't happen unless the words hurt the speaker too. I pretended I didn't think about that. But I did. Every single day. One evening, the sun was setting with a warm orange glow, the kind that makes the city look softer, calmer, almost beautiful. I stepped out of the cafe, tying my apron around my bag and rubbing my hands together to shake off the chill. And then my heart stopped. He was there. Steve. Standing under the streetlight like a scene ripped straight out of a memory I didn't know how to let go of. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his hair slightly messy like he had run his fingers through it too many times, and his eyes. God, his eyes. They weren't the sharp, confident CEO eyes I remembered. They were tired. Hurting. Searching for something. Searching for me. "Maya," he said softly, almost like he wasn't sure saying my name out loud would work. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. Every part of me suddenly felt too alive, too aware, too vulnerable. I wanted to run to him, and I wanted to run away at the same time. I managed to breathe out his name. Steve. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, like he didn't want to scare me. Or maybe he was the one who was scared. His voice shook just enough for me to notice. I chose wrong. The air around us felt heavier, like his confession had weight. "I shouldn't have pushed you away," he continued. "I shouldn't have let them decide anything for me. I shouldn't have pretended you didn't matter. I shouldn't have given the board that kind of power. I shouldn't have thought firing you was protecting you. It wasn't. It only broke you. And it broke me too." My throat tightened, but I stayed silent. He kept going. "So, I made a different choice." I blinked. "A different choice?" "I stepped down," he said quietly. The words slammed into me. "What?" I whispered, almost afraid I hadn't heard him right. "Vivian's deals fell apart," he said. "Everything she tried to build collapsed, and the board collapsed with it. The company became a battlefield I didn't want to fight on anymore. A long breath escaped him, tired and raw. "I don't want the company." Then he lifted his eyes to mine, and I felt something inside me tremble. "I want you." My breath left me entirely, like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. My heart pounded so loudly I swore he could hear it. I felt heat spread through my chest and into my fingertips. "Steve," my voice cracked. He stepped closer, and his voice softened even more. "I only ever wanted you." I swallowed hard and whispered the truth I had buried so deep it hurt to say it out loud. "I only ever wanted the job." He shook his head gently, closing the space between us inch by inch. "And I only ever wanted you." His words wrapped around me like warmth after standing in the cold for too long, like the kind of honesty that strips you bare and leaves you breathless. I didn't move. Couldn't. My entire body was electricity and silence and everything I had been running from. And without touching me, without saying anything else, he made it unmistakably clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. Our healing wasn't instant. It didn't happen with one apology or one touch or one beautifully fragile moment under a streetlight. No, it was slower. Messier. Human. It took honesty. It took fear. It took courage neither of us had before, courage that looked nothing like grand gestures and everything like two people learning how to breathe without breaking. The first few days after he found me at the cafe felt unreal. We didn't fall into each other the way people imagine. We didn't rush into a perfect embrace or pretend nothing had happened. We walked carefully, like two wounded people who still wanted to move toward each other but were scared they might bleed again. I remember the first time we sat together after everything. It was on a park bench near my apartment, just far enough from the noise of the city that we could hear ourselves think. The air smelled like rain, and the sky was a soft gray, heavy but gentle. Steve kept his hands folded. I kept mine in my lap. We talked quietly, voices low, almost hesitant. He told me he wasn't used to losing anything: power, control, battles, people. He admitted that the moment the board threatened my job, something old and fearful rose inside him, something that told him protecting me meant pushing me away. He said he hated himself for listening to that fear. I told him that being dismissed had reminded me too much of every time someone decided I wasn't worth keeping. I told him that I had spent so long believing I needed to earn love by being useful, quiet, perfect. I told him that when he looked me in the eyes and told me to go, it felt like losing something I didn't even realize I had fully let in. Neither of us cried. But the silence between our words was thick with all the things we wished we had said sooner. Healing took time. It wasn't a straight line. It looked like long conversations at late hours when vulnerability felt raw but necessary. It looked like moments where I flinched at the thought of being unwanted again and he reached for my hand, steady and patient. It looked like him learning that love wasn't weakness, and me learning that love didn't demand sacrifice of my self-worth. He learned to open up, piece by piece, like layers of armor slowly loosening. He told me about his childhood, about the pressure of inheriting a legacy he never asked for, about the loneliness of being admired but never known. He told me he had built walls not to keep people out but to keep himself untouched by the pain of losing them. And I learned to stop running from what my heart already chose. I learned to sit in the discomfort of being loved without condition. I learned that wanting someone didn't make me weak. I learned that standing still, letting myself be seen, was its own kind of bravery. There were days when we slipped. When insecurities whispered again. When silence stretched too long. But every time, we returned to each other a little stronger, a little steadier, a little more equipped to stay. And then one afternoon, in a sunlit corner of my small living room, he cupped my face gently, so gently it made my breath hitch. His palms were warm, steady, grounding. His thumbs brushed my cheek as if memorizing the softness there. His eyes held mine, not with the sharp intensity he once used to command boardrooms, but with something far more disarming. Tenderness. Fear. Hope. Love. You changed everything, Maya, he whispered. His voice wasn't deep in the commanding way it used to be. It was soft, vulnerable, almost breaking. As if letting those words out was opening a door he never thought he'd have the courage to open. My chest tightened in the best and worst way. A warmth bloomed there, slow and overwhelming. I didn't even realize I was smiling until the corners of his lips softened in response. My fingertips brushed his wrist slightly as I whispered back, almost breathless. You changed me too. His forehead rested against mine for a moment, and the world outside our tiny, imperfect space felt quiet in a way that only truth can create. Every wound, every fear, every mistake, it all felt like part of the same long road that somehow, against all odds, brought us here. And then our lips met. Not with urgency. Not with hesitation. But with a calm certainty that settled deep in my bones. Our kiss wasn't forbidden anymore. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't a risk we'd pay for later. It wasn't stolen from circumstances or borrowed from moments we weren't sure we deserved. It was ours. Soft. Slow. Honest. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing on the edge of something dangerous. I felt like I was stepping into something real, something that didn't come from adrenaline or fear or longing, but from the quiet decision to stay. His hands slid to the back of my neck, not pulling, just holding. Mine rested against his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath, like even his heartbeat was learning a new rhythm with mine. When we finally broke apart, he didn't let go. His eyes stayed locked on mine with that same soft certainty. And in that moment, something inside me shifted completely. For the first time, I realized I didn't just find a job. I found a voice I had been afraid to use. I found courage I didn't know I had. I found truth in places I thought would only hurt. And I found a love I never expected. With the man I was never supposed to fall for. Sometimes life writes a story you never planned on living. Sometimes it hands you someone who wasn't in your version of the future. Sometimes it breaks you just enough so you can grow into the person who can finally accept something good. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you weren't meant to want becomes the person you can't imagine your life without. As I sit with that, as I breathe it in fully, I can't help wondering how others would see this journey, how they'd feel walking through every messy, beautiful moment with me. Stories like this aren't perfect, but maybe that's why they stay with us. And if anyone listening or watching feels something, anything, I'd love to know. I'd love to hear what parts stayed with you, what moments you held your breath for, what choices you would have made differently. Maybe share it, maybe tell someone else who loves stories like this. Maybe even stay for the next one. After all, love stories grow stronger when they're shared. And if you're still here with me, still listening, still feeling this ending in your chest, then maybe we'll meet again in another story. Just don't forget to let me know you were here, so we can keep making these moments together.